Hi, everybody. Thanks for sitting down with us today. I appreciate it very much. We've got a great interview for you, got a great appraiser, great broker, too. She's very active in her state appraisal society. She's active in the National Association of Appraisers. And I want to welcome Ashley Wolthuis today. Ashley, thank you. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your effort. I appreciate your professionalism. How are you today?
I'm good, Tim. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's fun. We enjoy that. Ashley and I used to run into each other in meetings when we actually could have meetings, but now we run into each other on the phone. Now, Ashley, take a couple of minutes and tell us about yourself. You've got a very interesting background. Go ahead, please. Take a few minutes.
I was born and raised in Ogden, Utah. My dad was an appraiser. He was a certified appraiser, and he helped train quite a few people in our area into the profession. My first job with him was as his office manager in 1995, I believe, 95 or 96. And I managed an office with about 5 or 6 different appraisers. I was actually in high school at the time. And that's how I was first introduced to all things appraisals and real estate. Did you have a question?
Nope, not yet.
Okay. After high school, I went to university, continued to work in the appraisal office during all of my college, and then went to graduate school in Spain for development studies and got my master's degree there. Eventually I came back and worked in a couple different fields with investors and got my real estate license. So my actual first license was as a realtor. I was a sales agent. And that was very easy to get. It took me about 2 weeks of online classes, and suddenly I had this license in my hand. But I realized my real knowledge and background was still appraisals, especially from the 90s. As an office manager and assistant, I was able to do a lot more than assistants kind of are now, unlicensed assistants and non-trainees. And so I went back and I got my appraisal license. My dad was my supervisor, so I was lucky enough to have that in at the time. And it took me a few years as his trainee, but eventually I, received my own license and then my certification. And I have been dual licensed ever since. At one point, I also had a loan officer license. I never really used that, but I wanted to get the license because I wanted the education that came with the licensing process so I could understand all 3 aspects of real estate.
Now, as time has passed, as you have gotten your experience in appraising, and you're also still an active broker, but in your experience in appraising, you have been extremely active in organizations within the state of Utah, correct?
Yes, I have. So the Utah Coalition of Appraisal Professionals is our state coalition for licensed and certified appraisers, both residential and general. I am the past president, not the current past president. It's kind of misleading, that title, but I was the president of the coalition several years ago. It's an amazing organization. The support that the appraisers give to each other through the coalition, to me, has been absolutely career changing. So I would recommend anyone listening to this to get involved with their state coalition. And if they don't have a state coalition, to reach out. They'd be fine to reach out to me or to others, especially with the NAR, about how to form a state coalition, because it has made a huge impact on my professional life as well as many of the appraisers that I work with.
So not only are you active on the state level, but because you're a member of NAR, you also have what amounts to a national influence, correct?
Yes, I'm actually one of the co-chairs for the Board of Governors for the National Association of Appraisers. And the Board of Governors is made up of the different state coalition organizations. So I have been very blessed to be able to be involved with the NAA. and had the opportunity to meet appraisers from all over the nation, such as yourself, which has really improved, my ability to perform as an appraiser.
Well, let's capitalize on that. Let's leverage that topic. We spoke off the air, and you indicated that something you had started to do is to engage in surveys, especially with the brokerage community relative to real estate appraisal. Please go ahead and explain what's going on here. This sounds interesting.
So at one of the NAA's conventions, it was held in Nashville, I ran across a pamphlet on a tabletop there, and it was all about appraising landscaping and how to make adjustments for, in particular, like old growth trees. That's not something that we have in Utah, but it triggered my curiosity about how to make adjustments for things that matter to people that we might not see as traditional adjustment topics or subjects. And I hear all the time from appraisers that this agent wants me to give value to a certain characteristic of a home or a property, but there's no data to support the adjustment. I don't have data. It's not in the MLS. Utah is a non-disclosure state. So for appraisers in Utah, we rely almost exclusively on the data that is provided on the MLS. One thing I have started to do over the past few years is to rely more heavily on the survey method. So the survey method, as hopefully a lot of appraisers know, is a different method for appraisals and how to gather data that we need to support adjustments, or whether or not an adjustment is supportable at all or warranted. I have found that real estate agents know significantly more about the market than a lot of appraisers want to give them credit for, which I find to be very ironic. I'm a member of national Facebook groups, both for appraisals and for real estate agents, as well as state groups on social media for both professions as well. And I find that there are people in both communities that want to blame the other profession for any inadequacies that they see in real estate. I see a lot of appraisers that want to blame agents for always trying to push a value or wanting a value that they cannot support. I see agents thinking that appraisers are out of touch with the market, with what typical buyers are willing to pay for certain features or certain properties. And I have found in my experience that a lot of this is just due to a lack of communication between the two parties. Agents and appraisers both have a role to play in the real estate industry. And we really, especially in a non-disclosure state, we really can't rely and do our jobs properly without the communication between the two. Which leads me back to survey method. There have been so many circumstances where I have seen certain characteristics or certain properties that are selling for more or less, or definitely being impacted by characteristics that I can't support in a traditional way. The data isn't found on the MLS. And it sparked my curiosity. Why is this particular property selling for more or less? And in those circumstances, I have created surveys where I have reached out and sent emails to all of the agents active in this particular market, or to property managers, and asked them, in your opinion, what are you seeing, buyers and sellers? What is the impact of this feature? An example is the city where I'm from. The inner city has a lot of older homes that have been converted to multifamilies. They were not intended to be multifamilies in their original construction. They've been kind of chopped up, and a lot of them feel like jigsaw puzzle pieces when you go to sketch them, because they were not divided in half and turned into duplexes. But what I found is that some of these units are basement apartments. We do have basements in Utah, and some of the basements in Utah are about the equivalent of above grade living area. Some of them are not. Some of them feel like bat caves. And I would look on the MLS and I would see that some of these units that had basement ones weren't selling for as much as some of the ones that were more daylight. But it was harder to prove on our MLS because the data wasn't conclusive. And it didn't address those things specifically. So I sent out a huge survey to hundreds of agents that had sold or acted as the listing agent or the buyer's agent on some of these properties. I also sent the same survey out to different property managers. And I asked them, the first thing was, if you have a unit with very small windows and not a lot of daylight, are those rented at the same amount? And I would say 99% of the people who responded laughed basically on this email and said, of course we don't. Those units never get the same amount of rent as either a basement unit with a lot of like walkout, daylight, or an above grade unit. And so being able to have this survey with hundreds of responses really helped support when I had an underwriter come back and say, the location of the apartment doesn't matter, whether it's above grade or the basement. And what I found was it affects rent. And if it impacts the rent, then it needs to be noted in the appraisal. My data, I have the data that says it impacts rent, therefore it affects the value. So that was one example of a survey method. I've also done it for neighborhoods. I kept finding that within a few blocks of a country club, that homes were selling for more. But there weren't enough sales over a certain amount of time that I felt comfortable just relying on the MLS data itself. So I also sent a survey and I reached out to agents that had worked in this area over the past 4 years and just asked them, is there a certain neighborhood in this area or certain boundaries that bring a higher dollar or that has a higher market appeal to buyers? And again, it was overwhelming how many said, oh yeah, once you cross this street, people aren't as interested. These are the prime streets that people want. And it wasn't one agent, it wasn't two agents, it was dozens upon dozens of agents that came back with the same answer. So at that point, I felt like I had additional data that supported the limited data I was able to find on the MLS. So every once in a while, when I hear an appraiser say there's no data to support this, I'll recommend that they do the survey method. Yes, it is a little outside of the box for a lot of appraisers. I know a lot of appraisers who have never once used a survey approach. But I think it's solid data because I really believe that agents know the market in terms of what buyers want and what sellers are willing to give up better than appraisers. And I do think that if appraisers had more communication with agents on topics such as this, that appraisers would be much better at our jobs.
Ashley, given what you've said about surveys, do you have any background in the design and interpretation of surveys? Or is this something you leave to someone else? Or is it just a very short survey with just a couple of questions?
Typically the surveys are very short because when I do them, I'm typically looking for one question to be answered. And so I'll try to ask that question in a variety of different ways rather than just one question. Does this get more money, yes or no? I'll ask them questions like going back to the rent. I'll ask them, is rent affected by the location above grade or below grade? Is there anything that impacts basement values, one basement unit to the other? What do buyers typically prefer? Do they have a preferred location, or do buyers not care if it's above grade or in the basement? So I'll ask a variety of things, but they're typically centered around one topic rather than a massive survey about anything in the market. I don't have, I guess, formal training. I certainly took a lot of statistics classes in college and graduate school, so I do have that background. But like formal training, I don't really have. I do also write articles for a local magazine, a monthly periodical, and I write real estate. It's usually just a 1-page, maybe 1.5-page article. But it's typically about anything that is impacting the market in my city, in my community. And I use the survey method for that, in that I will send out surveys to people in our community, not necessarily agents, but just in general, to their subscriber list, different email lists that I have. And I'll ask them things such as, what house or what room in the house matters the most to you. That was a really interesting survey that I did with people that identified themselves as buyers who had bought a home within the past 5 years, or people who saw themselves as buying within the next 5 years. And anyone who identified themselves that way continued on with the survey. And the results of that were very interesting, because we hear, especially as agents, that nothing sells like a kitchen or a master suite. And those were high up there. But what was equally important to the people of my community was their yard, and their backyard in particular. Things that I see a lot of appraisers not giving any value for, like fully fenced backyards. There's a lot of appraisers in my area that don't give that much value, if any. That happened to be one of the highest priorities for, I think we had over 1,000 people respond to this survey. So it's really important, in my opinion, as appraisers, to pay attention to what the market actually is wanting, not necessarily just what's being reported on the MLS, because it's not necessarily the same thing.
Now, you just indicated that, for example, backyards, a lot of times appraisers ignore them, either because they never asked the question or it just didn't occur to them. Let's expand on that a little bit. In your experience, what is it that brokers, agents say a lot about the failings of appraisers?
That they don't take things into consideration. I hear that in a summary, that's probably the number one thing, that they're out of touch. But mostly that they don't know what buyers want. That's what I hear all the time. Especially right now, we're seeing it on a national level. Most markets are really crazy right now. Northern Utah, where I work, is absolutely insane. We have so few houses and such high demand. We're seeing 15% increases in value over a month.
Where are your buyers coming from? California?
That's what everybody says or complains about. Certainly they are coming from California, but they're coming from everywhere. I live 5 miles from a major Air Force base. And not only are we having more military members come into the base, we have like 5,000 jobs that are in the private sector that support the base for different contractors, all moving into our area. That coupled with one of the lowest unemployment rates in the nation, and we have the youngest population in the nation by a long shot. So the population of Utah continues to grow and grow and grow, and our housing supply is quickly shrinking. For the first time in my life, I am seeing apartment buildings going up in my city. There were a handful built in the 60s or 70s, and then some townhomes, but like big apartment complexes, that was never really a thing in Ogden. And now you can't drive down a random street without seeing some. Developers are doing everything they can to meet the demand for housing. We're also pretty landlocked in our area. As much space as Utah has, we don't have land for residential development. So that's another reason, going back to the yards, are important. Buyers want land because they know that it's something that isn't going to be available forever in this area.
Okay, from a standpoint of, okay, we looked at this from a standpoint of what agents typically complain about relative to appraisers. So as we wrap this up, let's turn that mirror around. In your market, what is it that appraisers typically don't like about brokers? And remember, this is a family program, so you have to be civil, and I know you will.
No, you know what? There are complaints that appraisers have, and they're valid as well. But I truly believe that all of the complaints that either profession has against the other could be reconciled with communication, an increase of communication. So for appraisers, I'm constantly hearing that agents don't understand appraisals. They don't understand the limitations that appraisers have. That's probably the overwhelming complaint that I hear. I'll be on a Facebook page and I'll hear an appraiser complain, I got a listing, or I got an appraisal assignment for a listing, and it was listed at $300,000, and there were 10 offers up to $350,000. And there's no comps to support it. And I'm so irritated. I don't want to work with these agents because, of course, they think that because they got 10 offers, it's automatically worth it. They don't know what appraisers have to do to support value. And that's pretty accurate. Most agents don't understand appraisals, at least not to the depth and the degree that they probably should. I think that's something that is lacking in a lot of agents' education and formal training, is to better understand the appraisal process and what appraisers need to do and need to comply with. Most agents have never heard of USPAP.
Most appraisers sometimes don't can say the same
thing. They may not
thing.
Understand it, but I bet they've heard of it. But no, there's so much misunderstanding between the two. I will call an agent to ask them for additional information. Or I'll call an agent, I'll have a contract in front of me that I'm doing an appraisal on, and it, is coming in significantly higher. I'll call that agent and ask them, is there anything about the house that I'm not seeing? Is there anything that, why are buyers coming in so high? What is it about this house? And I'll ask them these questions. And more often than not, I get a shocked response of, are you even allowed to talk to me? Are we going to get in trouble for having this conversation? And these are not new agents that I'm talking about, not necessarily. I'm talking about brokers that have been told that ever since Dodd-Frank, we're no longer allowed to have communication with each other, that we can't talk to each other about things. And to me, that's one of the most dangerous things to the appraisal profession is, and to be honest, I hear that from appraisers as well. I'll hear that as a complaint where an appraiser says, oh, I went to do an appraisal and the agent wanted to talk to me. Or the agent wanted to send me a CMA, or the agent wanted to send me additional documents. And they're almost offended that the agent would want to have increased communication with the appraiser. Now, certainly there's things that as an appraiser we can't discuss. We can't discuss assignment results. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be actively, and not passively, but actively seeking out as much information as we can about the market. And agents are key players in the market. And in Utah and non-disclosure states, they're pretty much what we rely on entirely for our data. So there's no reason we shouldn't be reaching out and trying to get more communication and more information on the market. I'll give you another example. Last year as an agent, I listed a home in my area and I listed what the internet speed was. And I had an appraiser call and say, Ashley, why did you include the internet speed? I've never seen that. And I'll say, well, I included it because it's extremely fast for that area. And I have had multiple buyers who have turned down homes or specific neighborhoods because the internet speed was not fast enough. I had a buyer from California that was looking at homes in the 800,000 to $1 million range, paying cash. He found a home that was absolutely gorgeous. It was perfect for their needs. They were about 2 minutes away from writing a cash full price offer when they said, how's the internet speed? And I said, let's check. I kind of knew it wasn't great. They saw the internet speed for that house and they instantly walked away. They went 3 blocks over, found a home that was not as nice as this one, but the internet speed was what they needed. They wrote an offer on the spot. There are buyers that things like internet speed matters to, especially right now. But I'm not seeing a lot of people paying attention to what it is that buyers are actually looking for.
And go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just going to, continuing on that point, I'm seeing, especially everybody working from home right now, or so many more working from home right now. My neighborhood has really bad internet. My neighborhood now has community action groups. They're trying to increase internet speed. It has become the #1 topic in my neighborhood. But I'm not seeing that being addressed in listings, and I'm not seeing that being addressed on appraisals because there's nowhere on the MLS, unless the agent takes the time to put it there, that this is something that matters. Yet, if I do a survey and I talk to agents that work in this market, they'll say, oh, that neighborhood's hard to sell because of the internet speed. But that's not anywhere on the MLS. That information comes from talking to the people in that neighborhood and the people that sell homes in that neighborhood.
And therefore, if there is a lesson to be learned from this, it's that appraisers need to think outside the box and determine other areas in which buyers might be interested that could affect value. Is that correct?
Yeah. Another example, the MLS board in our area added a drive time tool where you could put a major location like the airport, and you could put the address of the home, the listing that you're looking at, and it would determine what the average drive time to is to that major area, that major location. Because agents were finding that drive time to specific locations mattered to buyers. And you'll see it in agent remarks. Oh, it's only 30 minutes to downtown, or 20 minutes to the airport. It's 15 minutes to the ski resorts. So you're seeing agents already know that that matters to buyers. And appraisers realize that in terms of one of the first ways that we narrow our comps typically is by location. That's why location matters. But in some of the more rural areas, we will get some of our rural communities that are more typically based on agriculture. You will get communities that are 30, 40 miles away from each other, that underwriters might not understand that they can be comparable communities to each other because they have the same drive time to the major center of commerce. They might be 40 miles away from each other, but maybe they're only 20 miles away from a major city. And that's just one aspect of how those communities can be comparable to each other. So when you have an appraisal in one city where there's one sell in the last 18 months, and you have to go outside of that area, this is just one other tool you can use to support going this far outside of your area. So that's just another example.
Ashley, let's talk a little bit about the educational areas in which you're involved, because obviously you're talking about educating appraisers, you're talking about educating agents. You do some teaching for brokers and appraisers in Utah. Can you fill us in on that?
Yeah, so one of the classes that I have taught in the past through the Division of Real Estate, continuing education class through the Utah Division of Real Estate, is called Appraiser Communication. And this class in particular is taught to appraisers on who they can talk to and on what subjects. So we talk about using the survey method. We also talk about paying attention to the things that matter to buyers. One of the most popular sections of that class is talking about architectural styles. Yes, as appraisers, we have to list the style on the reports that we complete. But I don't see a lot of appraisers really paying attention to architectural styles much past that. Where I'm seeing agents that have been very savvy that if they list a home as being mid-century modern, whether it is or not, you will get increased activity because that is an architectural style that is very much in demand right now in northern Utah. But appraisers have a tendency to be a little bit behind the curve on realizing that certain architectural styles matter in certain markets more than others. I think that when I first brought this up, appraisers kind of thought that it was a strange topic to be learning about. But over time, I've had a lot of appraisers reach out to me and say, you know what, I've started to pay attention that when agents use certain catchphrases of architectural styles in a listing, they get more offers. They have more interest. They get higher offers than something that has the identical square footage, but a different look, even if it's the same quality and the same condition. So there are things beyond quality, beyond condition, beyond square footage that matter to buyers. And I do think that it's the appraiser's role to understand the market, just like it's the agent's role to sell the market.
Now, Ashley, you have opened our eyes to many things. If one of the viewers were to have a question, wanted to get in touch with you, how could they do that?
Well, they could reach out to me through email. My email is ashley@theelementsofrealestate.com. You'd be fine to share my number. It's public. If you Google me, you'll see my number plastered anywhere. My real estate brokerage is through Remax Associates. And we have offices up and down the Wasatch Front, as well as in southern Utah and St. George. And luckily, the owner and the brokers of this company are very pro-communication. They love having their agents more educated on appraisals. They are firm believers that if we all work together, the market in a whole is strengthened. I work in an environment where I am surrounded by agents who want to learn more about appraisals rather than bash the appraiser. And I really appreciate that environment. So,
Now, Ashley, the important question, you're a mom of how many kids?
I have 2 kids.
Very good. Thank you. Ashley, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your expertise. I appreciate your care. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to chat with you. And I hope the next time we get to chat at length is after we get to shake hands and hug.
Yes, I
Until
can't
that
wait
time,
to
we're
see
just going to
you.
have to keep staring at each other's computer monitors. So again, Ashley, thank you. And to everyone who has been with us today, thank you. We appreciate your watching. Look at the bottom right hand of the screen, click on the subscribe button, give us a couple of likes, and we look forward to the next time we get to chat. Thanks so much. Bye-bye now.